This just happened about 30 minutes ago. I was in the kitchen, and as I turned around, the very strong scent of my mom's distinct perfume hit me in the face. This happened 3 times. Now, my mother had an unusual mix of perfumes she used to wear, and was known to wear a lot of it. Also, she had a hint of air fresheners that she also had a lot of in her house. Mom passed away over 2 years ago and had never been to this house. We've only lived here 18 months. And we don't have anything here that smells the same as that. It was so strong and so distinct that my heart immediately pounded and I shouted to my partner, "I can smell my mother." I thought I saw something climb the stairs earlier today too, but passed it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. Now, I think there may be more to it. This is by far the spookiest experience my family and I have had regarding the paranormal. I'm currently living in Australia, and this all started when I moved into my current house around 3 years ago. In my culture, we believe that whenever a family moves into a new home, a priest should come to perform various prayers to bless the house. However, when my mom bought the house, we immediately went on holiday for 3 months, so we were unable to perform the rituals. Everything started when we first came back home. Just some background, my mom raised me on her own, so it was just the 2 of us staying in the house at the time. I was still in high school, and my mom worked in the city, so we both took the train every morning. She always left home earlier than me, so it was my job to lock up each day. She also worked late almost every day, so I would get home first and be home alone for at least 5 hours. One morning as I left home, I began to feel paranoid that I had not locked the door, so I walked back to check it. The door was locked. Later that day, when I came home, I walked up my driveway to find that the door was wide open. I freaked out, but was brave enough to go inside. Our kitchen is pretty close to the entrance, so I grabbed a knife and searched the entire house. There was no one there. I decided to not tell my mom because she was really stressed with work and I didn't want her to freak out too. Over the next few days, another strange thing started to happen. Our garage door would randomly open whenever we were home. My mom was kind of scared, but then we thought maybe our neighbor's garage remote functioned at the same frequency or something and it was activating our door too, so we dismissed it. It had been about 2 months since we were living in our new house and everything seemed to be normal again. Until one day when I was awoken in the middle of the night by my mom. She looked super scared and asked me if I had come into her room to wake her up. I said no, I was half asleep and had no idea what she was rambling on about. She didn't believe me and made me swear that I hadn't. I always play scare pranks on my family, so that was why. I swore I didn't and asked her what was up. She is a super light sleeper, and so while she was sleeping, she heard someone prop her door open. She looked up and saw the figure of a boy and thought it was me. She asked it, "What's wrong?" and blinked. There was nothing there, and her door was still open. She called my name a few times and there was no response, hence why she came to my room. I have to admit, given the stuff happening with the doors, I was kinda scared, but I convinced my mom that she was imagining things and she went back to sleep. Ever since that night, and up to this day, my mom still sleeps with her door open and the living room light on. And I do not blame her after what happened next. 2 weeks after this incident occurred, my mom's best friend and her son and daughter, who were both around my age, came over from our homeland, Malaysia, to visit us. I was really excited as I have always been close to them. One thing you should know about my aunt. She's had many experiences growing up with the paranormal, and so she is super afraid of ghosts. For this reason, me and her kids always used to play pranks on her. One day the four of us were playing poker on the dining room table while my mom was taking a nap in the living room. Suddenly my mom rushes out of the living room, her eyes wide open, and she looked terrified. She asked who had woken her up from her nap. The four of us were dumbfounded, as we had just been playing cards the entire time. She then told us that she felt someone tap her shoulder while she was asleep. When she opened her eyes, there were 2 feet on the floor. Once again she blinked, and the feet were gone, and there was no one there. My mom was having a full-on breakdown, especially after what had happened the other night. Then my aunt, given how afraid she was of ghosts, started to melt down as well. I didn't want her holiday to be ruined, so I managed to convince them that my mom was probably in the middle of a dream, so when she woke up, she was most likely hallucinating. Yeah, I know, it sounds stupid, but hey, it worked. But then the next day, something else happened. My mom had gone to the shops to get groceries. The kids and I were playing video games in the living room, while their mom was having a shower. Suddenly we hear the bathroom door burst open, and out runs my aunt wrapped in her towel. She screamed at us, telling us to stop trying to scare her, and that it wasn't funny. The 3 of us were extremely confused, and her daughter asked her what had happened. She told us that she knew we were the ones knocking on the bathroom door, even after she told us to stop 3 times. I know it probably seems like she was overreacting, but again, I cannot emphasize her fear of ghosts. I exchanged a concerned look with her kids, and then told her that it genuinely was not us, and that we were playing FIFA the entire time. Soon my mom got home, and we told her what happened also. Let's just say that my aunt started sleeping with her room lights on for the rest of her trip. Soon she and her kids had gone home, and it was back to me and my mom again. We returned to our regular routine. My mom was finally at peace, and she hadn't seen anything for a while apart from the garage door opening on its own every now and then. The same, however, could not be said for me. It seemed that it had become my turn to be tormented. As I mentioned before, with my mom at work, I would be home alone for a few hours every day. I began to start to hear things. The strange bit is that it would never occur while I was in the living room. Whenever I went to use the toilet or went to sit in my room, I would start hearing things coming from the living room and kitchen. It started out small, just the sound of some panting like if you had run a marathon. That kind of panting. But the minute I entered the living room, nothing. There would be no sound at all. It soon started to get worse. I would hear footsteps pacing around outside my room and spoons and pots falling in the kitchen. But every time I step out into the living room again, the noises would stop, and everything would be just as I left it. There was even a time when I thought I heard a kid laughing right outside the door when I was in the toilet. I decided not to tell my mom again because she seemed to be getting over her experiences and I didn't want to scare her all over. But one day I felt that I needed to tell her, and we decided that day that it was time we contacted our priest to perform the prayers for our house. It was the day my best friend and his parents came over for dinner. When it all began, it was a completely innocent meal. My best friend and his family are Malaysian too, and we were having a great time talking about home while having a signature Malaysian dish. My friend's dad was telling us a story when all of a sudden his face just froze, and his eyes widened. He honestly looked like he was having a stroke. His face contorted into a frown, and he just stared down at the table. My mom and I shared a worrying look, but my friend and his mom just continued eating like nothing was happening. Suddenly, his dad seemed to return to us, and he continued telling the story as if nothing had occurred. But he could see that my mom and I were visibly concerned. Suddenly, his wife tapped his shoulder and said, "Just tell them." He frowned at his wife and just kept eating. There was an awkward silence for a few minutes, and then he finally decided to address the elephant in the room. He apologized for scaring us and assured us that there was no need to worry. He then went on to tell us about his life. Since he was a child, he had been very religious, and from a young age he felt a very close connection to God. He regularly meditated and was very, very spiritual. So spiritual that when he was in his mid-20s, he had awoken with a gift. He was able to see dead people. I kid you not, when he said this, I immediately looked at my friend, waiting for him to start laughing at some prank. But my friend's face was completely serious, and he continued looking at his dad as the man told his story. He told us he could see them everywhere, when he was walking his dog on the street, when he's sitting in the park, in people's houses, and even sometimes sitting on people who had been possessed. He said the spirits were drawn to him because they knew that he could see them, and they would stalk him, begging him to help them reach the afterlife. He said there was simply nothing he could do because these people had died before their time, and they would simply have to wait on Earth until it was their time. Back home, he was regularly contacted by people having paranormal experiences to perform a cleansing or drive evil spirits away. He told us about some of those experiences, but I don't feel like it's my place to share them here. He then asked us something that gave me chills. "Have you guys performed prayers for your house yet?" My mom refused to answer the question until he told her why he had asked it. He said that he didn't want to worry us, but that if we hadn't, we probably should. My mom continued to ask him why until he finally conceded. This is what he said. "Remember when I had that moment just now while I was talking? I had a visit. I won't tell you what it was, but it was the same spirit that I saw standing at the front door when we came in here." That's when my mom told him everything that had been happening. It was during this time that I also decided to tell my mom about the things that I had been hearing in the house. My friend's dad then told us that he did not think it was a malicious spirit, but to be safe, and that it was time for us to conduct the prayers. Before he left, he asked my mom if he could see our altar in the prayer room. My mom took him to it and we all followed. As he stood in front of the altar, his whole body shook, as if he just had a huge hiccup. He then put his hands together and bowed his head. Before leaving, he said, "I can see why the two of you have not been hurt. You're protected." That concluded our visit. A week later, we arranged for a priest from our local temple to cleanse and bless our home. I promise you that ever since that day, nothing strange has ever happened in our house. Even the garage door has stopped opening on its own. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I have learned my lesson. I will never move into a house without performing the rituals that my culture demands. Okay, so this has happened 2 times that we noticed. The first time was 3 months ago. At 2 a.m., my husband was playing an Xbox game. Name of the game was Halo. So it was only my husband. My kids were asleep upstairs, and I was down in the basement in our room in bed. I was reading. He told me that he was on the couch. The game was paused since he was looking in his phone for a cheat or something for it. By the stairs, he clearly heard, "Mommy." My daughter doesn't call me like this, but they were asleep. He even checked. This was yesterday. At 5 p.m., I was coloring in the living room. The TV was on a Parking Wars episode, and my kids were upstairs playing a game. The hubby was outside mowing the yard. I clearly heard, "Mommy? Mommy, Mommy!" Clearly a little girl, and it sounded like it was behind me, not where my kids would be. And it was not my daughter's voice. Now today, I was folding clothes and had small hand towels by me. I watched as they were pushed off of the couch and away from me. Not like they would if they had just fallen down. I was 15 when the first time anything paranormal happened to me at this boarding school. For a month, I would have sleep paralysis. The next month, it got 10 times worse. As well as sleep paralysis, I would feel someone or something patting my head. I would open my eyes, and no one was there. This would carry on for a little while, until one night when I had sleep paralysis again and I looked over to the other side of the room and saw a slightly washed out figure of a woman wearing a maid's costume. This happened for a couple more nights until I left that school. I came back to that school for sixth form, the last 2 years of high school if you're American. It all started up again when I was moved into that same dorm, but this time she followed me around the school. In the end, I prayed for her. However, she still follows me around when I wear a certain necklace to this day. The last story I have is about 18-year-old me messing around with a Ouija board. Please don't do this. So my boyfriend at the time was the one who bought the Ouija board. A good friend had just died a couple of months ago. We messed around with it for a little bit until the planchette started to levitate. I somehow went into a trance for what felt like about 30 seconds. However, I got told it was for 5 minutes. When I came out of this trance, I had 3 scratches down my arm. The hand with scratches was red hot to the touch, but the other was ice cold. Of course, we decided to do it again the next night. Something predicted the future. The first thing it said was fire alarm. The next thing was knee surgery. And the last was asylum. As soon as this happened, the fire alarm went off. A year later, I had knee surgery. And then 6 months later, my ex was admitted to a mental facility. I know this sounds far-fetched, but this is what happened. Again, please don't mess around with Ouija boards. Not entirely my story, but the main event happened to my mom when she lived at home with my grandparents. Back when she was a teen, they had a beagle that would often stare down the hallway and growl at nothing, the whole deal. In the middle of the night while lying in bed, my mom heard the dog begin to growl just before she felt someone grab her by the ankles and begin to yank her out of her bed. She says she was halfway pulled onto the carpet before she started saying the Lord's Prayer and the hands let go of her. But her dog was still going absolutely nuts. There have been other little things that have happened there too involving other people in my family. No one seems immensely worried about it, but I've always had the feeling of being watched in that house, even before knowing some of the stories I've heard now that I'm older. It's always the same one. My grandparents have lived in it since it was built when they were first married, so no bad history of the house itself, but perhaps the land that it's on? My grandma has told us stories about seeing shadow figures walking down the hall. My brother smelled my grandpa's cigar smoke in the kitchen during a family event. My grandpa had passed away a couple of years ago. Used to always smoke a certain brand of cigar outside on the back porch. And I once was startled by a loud, raspy cough right behind me while I sat in the empty house playing computer games with the speakers off. Recently, my mom and I had installed some cameras in the basement and on the front and back porches, just for extra security. I'm dreading the day my grandma tells us one of them caught something, and I'll have to see it with my own eyes. When I was a kid, I lived in a little one-story house with my dad, my older sister, and my stepmom. It was a nice and quiet place. We had hardwood floors and there was a hallway leading from the living room into where the bedrooms were. It was a rather dark hallway which turned to the left and led to a guest bedroom and my parents' bedroom. The reason it was dark was because there was just a single dim light on the ceiling between the two bathrooms and the second bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway before it turned left. There was also an attic door right above the master bedroom's door. We never really opened it. It's weird. It just didn't feel like we had permission to, even though we did and could use it any time. I can recall one day after school I returned home to the house being empty. My sister was at a friend's house and my parents went out to try and surprise us with McDonald's before we came back home. I remember calling out my sister's name to see if she was home as well as my mom and dad's name, and no one responded. I went into my parents' bedroom where they had a computer. I sat down and started to turn it on, hoping to get a few minutes of gaming in before my parents came back. As I sat there, the room felt like it was getting darker, but I told myself that my eyes were just adjusting to the computer monitor in front of me. The computer which was taking a rather long time to boot up. Back then, I was maybe 10 years old. I looked around the room to see if my eyes would adjust, but it was still extremely dark even though the light was on, and it just seemed like they couldn't. It also started to feel colder and colder, and when I looked up again, the ceiling was completely black, and the darkness shrouded the light above me with a thick black haze. Immediately, I looked back at the computer to compose myself and tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just a kid that was creeped out for no reason. As I focused on the monitor, the room was cold and quiet. And suddenly, a woman's voice whispered shortly and sternly, my name. I could feel the wind on my ear and the pressure of someone holding my shoulder. I bolted out of the room, and moments later my dad came through the front door smiling and holding a kid's meal in his hand, asking me how my day at school went. I didn't tell him what had just happened. A little while passed, and my dad began having his own experiences in the house. Sometimes he would fall asleep watching his favorite TV shows on the sofa. In the middle of the night, when we had all fallen asleep, he would wake up and hear footsteps walking around the living room. He would also hear chains being dragged across the floor. At the time, we also had a dog. He said that our dog's head would follow the footsteps, and that was how he knew he wasn't just imagining it. The footsteps would lead into the kitchen, pausing for a moment before something dropped from the kitchen counter. Sometimes when one of us was alone in the house, we would hear little girls giggling and laughing in the bathroom at the end of the hall. I remember my dad talking to some of the adults in a serious tone. He said he could see the shadows of two people from underneath the door. He would open it after no reply, and there would be no one there. He would then notice that he was alone in the house. This was a common incident that many of us had experienced ourselves. My stepmom didn't like children, but she hid it very well from my dad. When he would leave for work, he would leave for 15 to 20-hour shifts. Sometimes she would put me in the basement and said if I couldn't behave myself like a person, I would be treated like an animal. The thing about being downstairs is that she would turn off the lights so that you would be downstairs and it would be completely black. It would feel like something was staring at me from the corner of the room. Something that was slowly creeping closer and closer to where I was sitting. Sometimes I would hear feet dragging in the distance, accompanied by tapping sounds similar to fingernails tapping on the concrete floor. This only happened soon after the sun had set and the basement was once again too dark to even see my hand waving in front of my face. As the sounds came closer and closer, I would hug my legs in a fetal position. At that point, I would sing a song from Anastasia, the one that my sister and I used to sing together, and hearing my voice made me feel less alone in that situation. Even as I felt the air thicken and the feeling of something weighing in next to me, waiting for me to open my eyes and take a look. Each time that I did manage to open my eyes in an attempt to see what it was, it would still be so dark that I didn't know if something was there or not. I learned how to toughen up and deal with that thing by treating it like a bully. Just don't let it get to you, don't let it bother you, I would tell myself. But the utter relief of the light turning on and being allowed to come back upstairs and watching my dad pull into the driveway was the best feeling in the world. Another one of my stepmom's favorite punishments would once again be in the basement. She would have my sister and I fold the clothes from the laundry machine. She would later tell one of us to go upstairs and then proceed to throw all of the clothes on the ground and then tell us to fold it again by ourselves. Downstairs, my sister and I knew that something was not right. The room had a TV and a small, dusty sofa. The door would always be open, and it felt like someone or something wanted you to come inside. It was almost magnetic. At times, we would have to go into the basement room whenever my stepmom had her friends over. We had to be quiet downstairs without a peep, or else she would get upset. Due to the giggling ghosts who were upstairs, we always seemed to get the blame, and were punished according to her mood. When I turned 12 or so, 2 of my dad's brothers moved into the house with us. One of my uncles slept in the guest bedroom, while their other uncle slept in the basement room. Sometimes we would go down there to see if he was hungry. When we entered the room, my uncle would be laying on the sofa with his eyes open, not blinking, and unresponsive. This would go on for a good hour or so. My dad said there wasn't anything downstairs, but he rarely went down there at all. My uncle said that there was something evil, and that it was trying to get into his body. My other uncle, who slept in the guest bedroom, said that when he was asleep he had a dream where a Confederate soldier without eyes kept screaming that they had been taken from him. He woke to see a floating blob of light right in front of his face. I remember one night as my sister and I were falling asleep, my dad kept yelling down the hall from the living room for us to stop talking and get some rest. He said it a few more times before my sister and I said we weren't talking. He then turned off the hallway light and said goodnight. Moments later, I opened my eyes, and behind our bedroom door was a little girl in old pajamas. She had long black hair and nearly blended in with the shadows. I stared at her and then covered my head with my blanket. Later on, 2 of my cousins moved in after my uncles moved out. They had our old bedroom, and my sister and I took the guest bedroom. My cousins were both boys, and we were supposed to help them get used to living with us. They kept fighting with each other. The youngest one would climb into my bed in the middle of the night because he didn't want to fight with his older brother. We had a lock on our bedroom door, and that made him feel better. Also, he did mention that the bedroom scared him, but I didn't ask why. Eventually, the oldest one started to walk around the house at night. We found makeshift weapons like a stick with sharp rocks on it, and a strong thread with something sharp on it as well. He said he was going to kill our stepmother and everyone else in the house. He was maybe just 12 or 13 at the time. Eventually, law enforcement became involved, and he was deemed insane. Once my dad found out about my stepmother's abuse, he swiftly divorced her, and we moved. We never saw her again. One thing I remember is while we were moving out, the landlord stopped by and had baked us all cookies. My dad asked them if anyone had died in the house. The landlords were shocked and said, "Yeah, there was an older lady who died from depression upstairs in the attic." They then asked my dad how he knew. He told them about our experiences. They also mentioned that the house was built on an old battleground. To this day, sometimes I drive past the house and think about knocking on the tenant's door. While I was growing up, around the age of 3 until 6 or 7, I had an invisible friend. He would only show up every once in a while. I thought maybe he was lonely and also needed a friend. I disliked the feeling of someone not having a friend when I was little, so I gently worked hard to be his friend, just so that he would have someone. Usually he would appear whenever my stepmom would be mean to us, and we were left alone for a bit afterward, or when I was scared or was having a paranormal experience, which at the time I didn't understand. My teacher was fond of me and told my dad that I was special and could grow into either a very bad or a very good person. While the other kids would play on the playground together, I would sit on the hill and just enjoy the grass and trees and wind, and my teacher would sit down next to me, enjoying it in silence as well. I remember one time the other kids were on the playground and, without being told to, stopped playing and sat down with us, and we all just sat on the hill enjoying the breeze. It was a pretty nice memory, just all of us enjoying the silence and having a moment, until the school bell rang. My dad didn't think that the little boy was fake, while my stepmom tried to get me to see a specialist. My dad did eventually take me to a specialist in order to make my stepmom happy because they constantly argued about it. I remember that at our last appointment I was in the waiting room. My dad opened the door and went into her office, and I remember as my dad's back was turned to me that the specialist concluded that nothing was wrong with me, that I was just a normal kid. My dad said something along the lines of, "I thought so, thank you," and he took me out for ice cream afterward. My dad later opened up to me after his divorce and said that in every generation some of the kids have gifts and that some people don't like what they can't understand, and that's why he thought my old friend wasn't made up. To this day, I don't know if he was a ghost or an invisible friend I made up as a little girl, but I do remember that he had his own personality that I was not in control of. He never really talked about anything, like about his life, even if I asked him questions. He just wanted to play, or he would show up and say, "It's going to be okay." I remember after a while, as my stepmom hated it more and more, he sort of slowly went away. Sometimes I would call out for him, which I didn't do before, and he wouldn't show up. Sometimes when I would cry, I would sort of wait for him, hoping a little bit that he would show up. But he never did. I eventually forgot about the little boy until one day in middle school. It felt like something which was not very good was in my bedroom with me that night. The house was oddly quiet. I figured I was being silly, so I fell asleep. That night, I had a dream that I was inside of a broken-down city as a girl again. It was a misty night with puddles on the road. I could even feel the rain falling lightly on my skin. I remember that my hair was wet. The city seemed to be empty. The street lights looked old, and there weren't any lights on anywhere. Many of the building's windows were broken. Inside of the rooms were dusty and unkept. I also noticed that there wasn't any furniture inside of them or lights or doors. It was just rooms. I called out, and my voice kind of echoed as the rain tapped the ground. I noticed rather quickly that I wasn't alone. Something heard me. As a figure of something slowly crept in the distance on the street behind me, I looked closer, but it wasn't a person. I heard a loud screech, and I instantly started to run as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Whatever was inhabiting that city wasn't expecting me. Suddenly, I was being chased by a bunch of shadowy, semi-human-looking things. They ran fast and would jump from the wall of one building to another building, clinging onto the sides, the bricks falling and hitting the streets and the sidewalks behind me. They nearly caught up to me until I turned the corner and started to run over to an old wooden fence on the outskirts of the city. I felt the water on the grass, and I think I slipped at least once. I saw the little boy on the other side of the dark brown, worn-down fence, and he said, "Take my hand." I did, and as we ran away through an open field in an attempt to reach some woods on the other side, those things were moments away from catching us. Their claws dug into the ground. Some of the speckles of dirt flew past my face. Then I woke up. On my ceiling above my bed there was a huge man in armor and medium-length brown hair. His hair moved and little parts of his clothes moved with it, as if they were submerged. But it didn't look to me like he had been near water. He had a silk cloth. It was either red or purple. The only way I remember it is because part of it had floated steady near his hair and face. Light seemed to emit not only from his body but from underneath his skin as well. As I looked at his face, he had an expression of warmth and calm, and it felt like we knew each other. He seemed so familiar. Only the area from the top of his head until about his waist or a little below it could fit within the space of my ceiling. I remember his eyes. It was like he were trying to tell me something. That he was the little boy the entire time, and it was going to be okay. The only way that I can describe the feeling of familiarity I had is, you know the feeling when you see someone after a while and you realize you knew each other when you were kids? Eventually, after what felt like a longer time than what it probably was, the man faded away, and it was just me in my empty room. That morning when I went upstairs to fix myself some breakfast, my uncle was talking in the living room about having a dream. I didn't really catch what his dream was about, though, until he mentioned that he woke up in the middle of the night when he heard aggressive scratching and banging on his door. My dad didn't believe him, so he brought my dad and my sister and I downstairs to show us that it was true, to show my dad that he wasn't making it up. There were long, deep scratches on the other side of his bedroom door from the hallway. I can't explain what happened or what had made those scratch marks. I usually don't open up about my experiences. I honestly haven't had the courage to until a few days ago. Rarely have I shared them. I still haven't told my family about my dream, or the man I had seen either, but they still talk about the scratches. At the time of this story, I was a 16-year-old high school student. I got a babysitting job for a couple who had a family wedding and needed a babysitter for a super late night. I was referred to them by another family that I used to sit for. Keep in mind, this was when cell phones were just coming out, so I had a really crappy flip phone with a certain amount of minutes. There were 3 kids. The oldest was a boy about 8, the middle boy was about 6, and there was a little girl who was a toddler in diapers and couldn't speak. I came in while the sun was still up to meet the kids while the parents were still there. The parents were so cool. They showed me where all the snacks were and gave me the ground rules for the night. Kids in bed by 7:30, teeth brushed, you know the drill. Once they left, we started eating dinner. To my shock, the middle child, who we'll call Teddy, kept throwing his fork hard at his siblings and pinching his sister with his nails under the table. He kept kicking my shins and throwing his food around the room. The moment his parents left, he became a terror. Their house was old but remodeled, so their toys were in the basement playroom. After dinner, we all went in there to play. As soon as we went down the stairs, it felt wrong. Don't get it twisted. It was a beautiful finished basement with a couch, flat screen, and toys, but something just felt creepy about it. Then the little girl kept pointing at a blank wall, one with no pictures or anything on it, and kept screaming at the top of her lungs and crying. It really unnerved me. At this point, I'm getting a terrible, really bad feeling. So I say, let's go upstairs and watch TV till bedtime. The kids seem to love that idea. So I carry the little girl upstairs and turn on the TV for the 3 of them and then go back down to grab her favorite stuffed dog and clean up a bit. When I turn around to walk upstairs, I see Teddy smiling a sickening smile at the top of the stairs. He has his hands on the light switch. My stomach dropped. I didn't have my phone or a light, and if this little shit locks me down here, I thought. The light switch is at the top of the stairs outside the stairway, so if he closed the door, I was screwed. And sure enough, he flicked off the lights, cackled, and went to slam the door and lock me in the dark basement. I have never moved so fast in my existence. I flew up the stairs and shoved my hand into the door to keep him from locking me down there. I asked him why he did that and yelled at him to never do that again. All he did was smile at me and then slowly walk away, giggling. I iced my hand and watched him closely for the rest of the night. Bedtime comes around, and I put the kids to bed upstairs without any problems. There were 3 bedrooms, the parents' room at the end of the long hall, then the baby girl's room in the middle, and the boys shared a room with the bunk bed at the end of the hall by the top of the stairs. Everything finally seemed quiet, and I began to forget the horrors from earlier and started watching TV. About an hour after I put her down, the baby girl started screaming through the baby monitor. A scream that sounded like she was in pain. Thinking her brother Teddy was bothering her, I ran upstairs to stop him. As soon as I get to the top of the stairs, I see him laying down on his bed facing the wall. The baby is hysterical and is again pointing at nothing and crying. I am freaked out by now. I rock the baby back to sleep, check on the boys, then return to the living room. What the hell is happening? Am I imagining things? I shake it off and turn the TV back on. This is when the night goes from bad to a total nightmare. Once back in the living room, I start to hear screaming every couple minutes. What sounds this time like a grown man screaming in pain. At first I thought it was outside or maybe a TV or a radio, so I ignored it and kept watching television. But soon it became clear that it wasn't a joke and it wasn't my imagination. It was coming from inside the house. Then I hear what sounds like little feet running upstairs in the hallway. For a second, I'm not scared anymore. I'm angry that Teddy's out of bed 2+ hours after bedtime. I go to the bottom of the stairs and holler up Teddy's name and tell him to go back to sleep. I don't hear a response, but I do hear the footsteps continue. Then I hear what I think is him run into his parents' room at the other end of the hall. Feet pounding down the hallway clear as day. So I sprint up there, thinking I've caught him in the act. The hall is empty and dark. I turn, and I find Teddy is sitting up in his bed. He's staring at me again with that sickening smile. I could see his brother was asleep on the top bunk, and I could see that his baby sister was asleep on the monitor in my hand. He gave me the creeps. I told him to lay back down. I go back downstairs to the middle floor. I then hear someone walking up from the basement, and I lost it. I slammed and locked the basement door, and I called my house number. My big brother answers, and I tell him that I'm scared. He puts me on speaker and I explain everything to my family. I babysit every weekend and I've never had a negative experience or called them like this, so luckily they believed me. My grandpa, being a super religious man, prayed with me and calmed me down. My big brother got into his car and came to sit with me until the parents got home, but the town I was in was a bit of a drive, so he told me he'd be there in 40 minutes. Even after we hung up, I could hear the footsteps running around the house. I am not a religious person, but I sat on the couch and prayed and cried. I have never been so scared in my life. I was terrified. The parents came home before my brother got there and they saw that I had been crying. They asked what happened, and I told them everything non-supernatural that occurred because I didn't want them to think I was a crazy person or tell people not to hire me. I just wasn't going to mention it at all. So I just said Teddy was a handful, and that was it. As I was leaving, the dad, in a deadly serious voice, said, "Did the ghost bother you?" I slowly turned to him, not fully believing what I had just heard. I asked him if he was being serious. He said, "Oh, I'm being serious. We've had a ghost problem for a while now. Did you experience anything yourself?" I broke down and started crying when I gave them an honest recap of the night. I told them about the screams that I heard, the footsteps, everything. How the baby was crying at the wall and how Teddy tried locking me in the basement. They believed me right away. The parents said they'd moved into the house about 2 years ago after the old man who built the house died inside of it. He was an actual hoarder and fell and injured himself in the basement and died among his piles. Since no one could hear him scream, they didn't find him in time. By all accounts from the neighborhood, he was a mean recluse of a man. Either way, what a terrible way to go. They said they would wake up every night to things flying off of their kitchen counters and doors slamming. They would hear knocks and pounding in the walls. I was shocked. I asked why they stayed in the house if they knew it was haunted. They explained they weren't able to move due to their jobs and current financial situation. I have to admit that although it wasn't huge, it was a beautifully built home. That old construction kind of home with bookshelves built into the walls and a winding grand staircase. The dad said he would go downstairs every night for a year and say, "Go away. This is our home now. You aren't welcome here," over and over. He said eventually the activity stopped. They said it only sparked up when someone new would stay in the house or when they'd have a sitter at night. They said since I quote-unquote knew the truth now, that they would pay me extra to come back because they could never keep a babysitter. Pfft. Yeah, right, I thought. I am never going back there. But I said I'd be in touch, and I ran out of that house. I am ashamed to say that I never answered their calls again. I felt bad, but there was no way in hell I'd ever return there. I still babysit once in a while, and I've never had any experience like that since. I still think of those kids sometimes, and I really think that Teddy was being affected by the spirit there. I've never encountered a child so cruel, so negative. Thinking of his creepy little smile still sends a chill down my back. I hope they were able to move or clear the negative energy. Either way, it's one night I won't forget. I would like to share my recent experience. This is absolutely true and in no way fabricated. I have been shaken up immensely and my perspective on reality has definitely changed. I live in India and my family is Protestant Christian. My upbringing and the things taught to me in terms of faith have included an aspect of the supernatural and the spiritual. Though it was always told to me that demons and spirits of darkness exist, I was always a skeptic. I believed in proof, evidence, and logic. In my opinion, exorcisms were staged and everything about it was fake, until I had what seems to be my own personal experience with the demonic. This happened about a week ago. I was on my bed, playing a racing game on my phone at 2 a.m. The lights were off, and the only light was that of my phone. I usually put my AirPods on and keep my volume on full as I enjoyed the loud engine revving sounds of the game. I started feeling an ache in my back, and this made me think I was having another bout of kidney stone pain. It runs in my family. My way of coping with it is to just ignore it and move on with things. I've had multiple stones in my body, so I have learnt to manage the discomfort well by now. As I continued with the game, I started feeling breathless as the air was heavy. It came to a point where I thought something was definitely wrong. There was a dull pain in my stomach and head too. The sounds and music of the game I was playing became very muffled and scary. I managed to pull out my headphones and lie down. I laid out on the bed, on my back, looking up at the ceiling, wondering what was going on. My wife is working abroad for now, and I really wanted to ring her. I was not able to do that, however, because somehow logic and common sense had taken a back seat at that moment. I just wasn't able to think clearly. My palms and forehead were covered in sweat, and felt crushed, like under weight of something terribly heavy. I honestly thought I was about to die. My mom had visited me in March of this year and has not been able to since leave and head back to her own house due to the lockdown. So she was sleeping in the guest room and usually fast asleep at that hour. My mom is a very deep sleeper and rarely gets up for anything in the night. During all this madness that I was going through, she just woke up and came to my door and knocked. I heard the knocks, and I wanted to say, "Please come in and help me," but my mind was too confused to do anything. She heard some groaning-like sounds coming from me and decided to let herself in. When I looked at her, I wanted to say help, but apparently I kept saying, just let me be. Let me die in peace. My mom told me this later. When she saw me in the state that I was, without any hesitation, she touched my head and said, "In the name of Yeshua, I bind you, rebuke you, and cast you out." I felt the immediate sensation of wanting to puke. I rushed to the loo and did so. Instantly, I felt better, and my mind began working correctly. I could think straight and had no trouble breathing. The whole recovery didn't take more than a couple of minutes. While I know that this can be dismissed as a simple case of indigestion or acidity, food poisoning, or even an anxiety attack, here are some reasons why it's got to be more. 1. The probability of my mom walking in that time was very low. Later, when I asked her why she came in at that hour, she simply said, "Because I felt like I should." Like a prompting in my spirit. 2. Why would I say things like, "Just let me die"? Any person in need of medical attention will cry for help rather than wanting to be left alone. 3. Why did I need to puke just after my mom said those words? 4. I had eaten dinner at 5 p.m. If it had something to do with that, why would it surface at 2 in the morning the next day? And 5. About a month before all this happened, I had a nightmare about an entity in my room. Something that looked like a black being with red eyes and teeth like a wolf, grinding its teeth at me or making low-pitched growls. I was scared after that, but I had dismissed it and moved on. I am really beginning to think that what I went through was a spiritual demonic oppression, which retreated due to the compulsion from a higher spiritual authority. Here is the chilling tale of one of my stepmoms, who we'll call Lisa here, experiences with ghosts that she has conjured through her old Ouija board. So Lisa had just divorced her ex-husband and was living alone in a new house with her 2 kids. She moved to get away from the torturous spirits or demons in her old house. She was settling down with a broken heart and a new life. She went to bed after forgetting to pray one night. She did this because it was what the priest told her to do to solve her problems with the paranormal. It seemed to work, she told me, but when I didn't do it, it would all come back. Lisa had no paranormal experiences while she was in that house. Until now. On the night she didn't pray. Her oldest kid was 7 and now sleeping alone. Her youngest was 3, and Lisa kept her sleeping in her room because she felt like she had to keep an eye on her. Because of all the experiences, she was a worrywart. Anyway, she falls asleep and wakes up to 3 knocks. She knows this all too well. She lit a sage, prayed, and went back to sleep. This didn't work. That night she kept hearing scratches on her wall above her head. She turns to look up and sees a face in the pitch black dark. Lisa just woke up and thought it was her imagination. But then came a feeling of impending doom. A feeling also that she knew too well. She turns on her lamp, turns around to see a black mist looming next to her bed. She grabs her daughter, who is sleeping with her, and grabs a Bible. She screams for the mist to go away, and everything calms down. She flicks on the light, paces around the room, and looks over to where she heard the scratching sounds earlier. To her horror, she sees 3 scratch marks the size of tiger claws above her bed on the wall. The scratches were on her wall until she put up new wallpaper. I asked her stepdaughters. One of them remembers her mom screaming at a wall. She never saw what my stepmom saw, but they wondered why they saw the scratch marks. So before some of y'all say I'm making this up, it's not my responsibility to prove it. And that's it for part 4 of this ongoing true Reddit ghost stories series. Let me know what you guys thought of the video, along with which stories were your favorites down below in the comments section. Since the second most voted for topic in the last poll was creepy humanoid encounters, and I already have a decent number of stories collected, I'll be working on that as the next true scary stories video that I release, so be on the lookout for that one here soon. Also in the works is yet another No Sleep series compilation video that I really think you'll all love, titled Red Mist, so be on the lookout for that one over the next week or two as well. I hope everyone has had a great weekend, and I look forward to bringing you all much more awesome content in the future. And since I'm doing this full time, there will definitely be a lot to anticipate. Don't forget, as always, that all links for things that might interest you, everything from merch and playlists to my various contact links, can be found below in the description. I'll see you all again soon, and until then, embrace the terror. This is K.E. Goodwin here at Undead Storyteller, signing off.